Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's yet again time for a webinar in the Modernize series. And this is just a great series about Windows 10 modernizing, and let's get on with the FireDAC for Windows 10 database access. Feel free to, whenever you want to, look at the link that's in the screen here at embarcadero.co/Windows 10 Modernize webinar series if you want to replay these videos here. My name is Jens Fudge, and as you can see on the bottom of the screen, I'm a Delphi enthusiast and MVP. I'm a speaker and I work as a trainer also. And today, the webinar agenda for today is, well, I'm going to talk about the connection with FireDAC. So first I'm going to tell a little bit about which databases can I connect to if I'm using the FireDAC framework that's in my Delphi box. And I'm going to tell about how to connect with the different connection types that we can do, and that is temporary connections, persistent connections, and also private connections. So to see which FireDAC databases are supported, there's a small list here. So at least Interbase, Firebird, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, MariaDB, MySQL, SQLite, MS Access, PostgreSQL, and ODBC generic databases, and of course more. So there is virtually any database that you can connect to. If you have any problems with any of these databases to connect to them, you can see the support for the specific databases on the link that's on the bottom left of this screen here. And some of these databases will require you to install some client software, some drivers or something on your local machine where your application is running. Some of them do not require anything else but your FireDAC components in your Delphi. Now, to be able to connect to anything across the network card, you will need to have the Delphi or RAD Studio or C++ Builder Enterprise Edition, because the Professional Edition will only support the local databases. And let's get on with this I'm going to tell you first about the temporary connection, and then I'm going to show you exactly how to do so. So a temporary connection. A temporary connection is a connection that's defined within the application. So it's only valid within the application and it cannot be shared. It's also a so-called unnamed connection, as it doesn't have a name, the connection. Well, the component has a name, but the connection itself does not have a name. And it cannot be pooled. Now, pooling could be a significant thing that you want to look at if you're making any applications that are threaded, because if you have a threaded model accessing any database, you will need to have a connection per thread, and in that case it is very good to have a pooled connection, because having a pooled connection means that you do not have to, every time you create a new thread with a new connection, it might not have to actually create the connection, because it can just pull off one of the ones in the pool. And to be honest, creating connections, if you're doing it a lot of times, can be very time consuming and expensive. So if you're thinking about having any threaded connections to your database, make sure that you have a pool of connections. Your temporary connection, you can set it up at design time, either by using the connection editor and or the object inspector. But you could also set it up by the params property of the FireDAC connection component. And of course you can set it up with code. So it's set up and defined at runtime. So I'm going to hit off a demo here to show you how to do exactly so. Okay, so this, in my Delphi, I have here a standard VCL application that I'm going to hook up to a database. So of course I have made a data module, and on the data module I'm going to put a TFD connection. Now the way I usually get components is press F6 and then just start typing what it is that I want, and what I want now is a TFD connection component. Once I have the TFD connection component, I can double click it, and this will open up the connection editor. Or I could also right click and choose connection editor. I want to connect to an Interbase database at this moment, so I'm going to, in the driver ID, choose the IB. And as you see, once I've chosen IB as the driver ID here, all of the properties in the bottom part of this screen here are enabled for me to fill in. So for example, the database, I can here choose which database that I want to go to. And I have obviously copy pasted into the clipboard here. The standard username for Interbase database is sysdba, and the standard password is master key. And I'm going to go on a local database here, so the protocol is local, the server is of course localhost, that I don't need to specify, but I can if I want to. And I can now test and see if this is working. If this is working, I will see a connection established successfully, as I do here. If it was not working, that could be because that if your Interbase is a developer version of the Interbase, it could be that it's not running. If that's the case, then you have to go to the services and then in services start your service. In this dialog here, the connection editor, there's also the options tab, and in the options tab there are quite a lot of different options that you can adjust your connection with. All of the options here are general options, so this has nothing to do which kind of database that you're talking to. This works with both Interbase, Firebird, Microsoft SQL, and the rest of them, as long as they of course support what you're putting up there. On the information tab, this is actually a very good tab, because in here, if something goes wrong with your connection, you can in here go and check what exactly is going on here. So we have for instance, the client DLL name is, I am actually at this moment using C:\Windows System 32 GDS32.dll. So if anything goes wrong, you can go in here and check what's going on. So this is a very, very nice tab to be aware of. There's also a SQL script tab here, and in here you can write in some test SQL or whatever you want. So just to make sure that I have everything hooked up correctly, I could go ahead and select all from BioLife and hit the green play button here. That's going to send the SQL, and as you see, I got 28 rows selected. So this is all good, and I am pleased with the settings that I've put on this connection here, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I have the connection, and in the connection component there are a couple of things that I want to show in the object inspector. One of them is the login. One of them is the login dialog that pops up once you connect, and it's not always that you want this. Why does this not like to be selected? Okay, so in the login prompt I switch that off so that I don't get the login dialog. I could choose my own login dialog if I wanted to, but I have not created such a thing. So it's now not going to ask the user for a username and password, but just expecting everything to be there. And one thing here is very nice is the connected storage properties. Is you can set design time and runtime here, so that if you switch those off, it will not remember the connected property when you're opening up the project, or even worse, when you have created an executable and shipped the executable to the customer. If it was by accident connected to the database, once your customer tries to execute the executable, it will try to connect to that database that you connected to on your developer machine, which he obviously probably will not have. I can, while I'm designing, of course, set the connected property to true. So now my component here is actually connected to the database. Now I also need another component to be able to retrieve the data that I want. And the other component that I'm going to add here, I'm pressing F6, getting up the cursor in the search dialog, and now I want a TFD query component. The TFD query component is one of the components that I can use to actually retrieve data from the database. I'm going to right click on it and choose the query editor here. I could also just have double clicked it, and in here I can set the SQL that I want. So I'm going to, as I did on the test, select all from BioLife. I mean, I have to go with BioLife in this demos database here, because how can you have a Delphi presentation without fish facts? Of course I'm going to do the fish facts here. So I'm going to execute to make sure that I've spelt everything right. One thing about SQL is that it's not compiled in your with your compiler, so you have to make sure that it's spelt correctly, that the tables are actually called what you have named them here. So I do get the data. I can, if I had any parameters here, I could set up the parameter types and whatnots in here. I could also set up the macros in here, and I have a bunch of options, like I did have a bunch of options on the connection. Now again, the options, they are general options, so these work with all or most of databases. So hitting OK, I have now saved the SQL inside of the component. So whenever I compile and run this application, the SQL is already there. So if I go to my main form here, and of course I did say we're going to do a fish facts thing, so I'm going to hit the F6 to be able to type in TDB grid, because the TDB grid is the control that I want here. I'm going to move it up a bit, make it just a slightly bit bigger, and right next to it, of course, you have already guessed, those of you who have been with Delphi since Delphi 1, I want the TDB image, and I can set the image component next to the grid component. And now all virtually I need is the T-data source. Now sometimes there's a little religion thing about, does the T-data source belong on the form or does it belong on the data module? I believe it belongs on the form, because this is nothing to do with data. This has something to do with displaying data. So I'm going to choose in my Object Inspector on the dataset the data module 1 FD query 1. So now that I've chosen that, I can go to my TDB grid, and in the TDB grid I can choose the data source 1, and I can, on the DB image, choose the data source 1, and the TDB image also has a data field property, and in the data field property I'm going to choose the graphic field. If you notice that the cursor momentarily just changed into a SQL cursor, that's of course because the components here are looking up what kind, which fields do I have in this table. So now I have everything hooked up here. I can now add a button, so I'm going to add a T button just to open everything up once the application is running. So I'm going to, of course, set the caption of the button, and had this been a FireMonkey application, then it would be the text property of the button, but for now it's the caption property. Set that to open, and on the event handler for the buttons click, I have data module 1. I need to spell this correctly, otherwise it won't compile for some reason. Data module 1 dot FD query 1 dot open. Now I do not need to open explicitly the connection, because once I'm calling FD query 1 dot open, if the connection was not open, then the connection would now be opened. So I'm going to save all of this off, and then I'm going to hit play. And if I've done everything right, it should be working, but let's go and have a look and see. So my application compiled, linked, and now I have it running. I can hit the open button. I now have a grid with all of my fish. I put the image a bit small, but never mind. I have all of the fish here, and everything seems to be working. So this was actually the temporary unnamed connection of how to use FireDAC to connect to an interface table. So, as I said, we have some other types of connections. So the next one is a persistent connection. A persistent connection is a named connection, and it needs to have an external definition file. The external definition file is outside of the executable, so it has to be next to the executable file, or maybe somewhere in the path of the client where you are running the application. Obviously, this definition file can be shared by more than one application, and one other good thing about it is it can be pooled. So the not the definition file can be pooled, but the connection can be pooled, and that means that it's much better if you're thinking of making threaded applications that in threads have connections to the database, as each thread needs its own connection. So to create a persistent connection, this is just as easy as the unnamed temporary connection, but it's done in a different manner. So what you do is that you go on to your tab Data Explorer, which is located on the same place as you have your project options, and in here you locate, in this case I want the Firebird, and I'm going to when you right click on the node here, you can add a new named connection. So add new connection, and in here you have to set a name for this connection. Now I want FB employee as the name, because I'm going to connect to a Firebird employee database here. So hitting OK, and this is going to bring up to me the same connection dialog that we saw before, but with the driver ID already set to being a Firebird. So the database I have copy pasted where it is, and the path that I'm pasting in here is relative to where it is on the server. Now this is because I'm connecting on a remote machine this time, just to show that this is just similarly as easy as connecting to a local machine. Connecting to a remote machine does, however, need you to have the Enterprise Edition of Delphi or RadStudio or C++ Builder. I know that there previously has been an add-on pack that you could purchase for creating database connections across the network, but that add-on pack is no longer in the SKU, but you should contact an Embarcadero sales representative if you already have such one and you want to upgrade your Delphi. Then they'll probably know much more about this than I do. So the username is just like it is with the interface, is sysdba, and the password is master key. And I want not the local protocol, I want a TCP/IP protocol, because I'm going to talk to a server that is on 102.168.26.109. and let me just check and see if this works by hitting the test button. So I have the server running somewhere, hit the login OK, and I did get the connection established successfully, so this means that it's actually working. I can hit OK, and this is going to save for me the connection, the named persistent connection in the Data Explorer that I have created. To be able to use this, there is a very nifty way, because you can open up the node here, FB employee, that has become, and then you can also up the tables node. And what this is going to do is going to actually check what tables is on that database. So if you don't remember what tables you have, you can check here. To connect in your application to a persistent and named connection, you still do need to have the connection component, so that's the TFD connection, and you'll still also need to have a TFD query component to be able to query. But to be able to create this is quite easy, because you just drag from your Data Explorer onto your data module, and in this case I took the table and dragged on top of the data module, and this gave me two components, the TFD connection component and the customer table component, which is in fact a TFD query component. So even if the name is table, it's a query component. And of course they are filled in with the SQL and the connection properties that you need. And now the rest of the application is just a matter of finishing the application just as we did before, where we are going to add a TDB grid and a T data source. So there's the TDB grid. And a T data source. I'm going to hook up the data source to the dataset. I'm going to hook up the grid to the data source. And of course, once I set the datasets active property to true, then I should see that it's populating the grid. And there we go. So now we have the grid full of customers from the employee database. As this is a persistent connection, of course we have to persist the data about this connection somewhere. And as I explained during the slideshow, we need to have this in an external file. So by default there is a file called fdconnectiondefs.ini stored in shared documents Embarcadero Studio FireDAC. And if we open up this ini file here, we can see that there has been added a section in the ini file at the bottom called FB employee. That's the connection that I have just added now, and obviously we do not want to deploy this complete fdconnectiondefs.ini file with our application. So what we do is we'll just copy paste this section here that I've marked, paste it into a different file, and that file we will just have where the executable is going to be. So I have here pasted it into fdconnectiondefs.ini file that is located next to my executable here, where it's going to be, of course, saved out as soon as I run the application as an executable file. Now the name here, fdconnectiondefs.ini, this is the name that it's actually going to look for, and it is actually going to look for this file next to your executable. You can change the fdconnectiondefs.ini name and also the location of where this file is if you put into play a third component, which is the TFD manager. I'm going to use the TFD manager in the next demo about the private named connections anyway, so as soon as I start the next demo I will show you how to use the TFD manager, which is the component that you can also set the file name and location of the FD connection defs.ini. So the last type of connection that I want to tell you about is the private connection. The private connection is in reality exactly the same as the persistent connection, except from one thing, that it does not have an external file at all. So obviously it cannot be shared with other applications, but other than that it's the same thing. The only thing that you have to do is you have to set it up runtime. So obviously you have to set up the connection before you start querying your databases. So we will, in the demo here, I will show you a demo where I am on the data modules on create method setting up the private connection, and it does involve some more components, but let me go to the demo and I will show you. So for the named private connection, we have also the TFD connection component that like we used to. We have the TFD query component like we used to. The TFD connection, I haven't set anything up. The TFD query component, I have actually filled in some SQL here, but that's all I've done. Then I've added a third component, which is the TFD manager. I haven't done anything with the TFD manager, but if you need, like the previous demo with the persistent named connections, you can here add a TFD manager and then set the connection def file name here. Runtime or design time, that doesn't matter. Now, as this is a private connection, I have to fill in everything on runtime, and that makes sense by doing it in the data modules on create method, where I have a local variable which is a tstring list, and I'm adding some strings to this local variable. I have added the database is C: wherever this is. I have added the driver ID as an MS Access driver. This is querying a Microsoft Access table. It doesn't actually have to have Microsoft Access installed on the machine, just Windows will do, so you don't need any external drivers or anything. And then you add the pooled is true parameter, because I want to make this in a safe threaded environment where each thread needs its own access to the database, so its own connection to the database. If you see that from the database's point of view, it will, each connection, even though it's the same application, each connection will from the database point of view be a different user. Then I'm going to add this connection def that I have created with the name. Here is the name of my named connection, access_db demos, and it is an MS Access driver ID, and I'm adding the param list that I've created, and then I set the connections connection def name to the access_db demos, and now I connect the TFD connection component. So it's all just done in code on the data modules on create method, and of course it goes without saying that you have to make sure that all this is set up before you query any of the tables, because if you query a table that and there is no connection, of course it's not going to work. So if I open up the main form of the application, you can see I've added the grid and I've added the T data source. I have added a button, and I'm just calling the fdquery1.open on the buttons on click event handler. So let's see what happens if I run this application. So it runs, I open up the application and I click the open button, and it retrieves all of the dive shops that are in this table. So this is the private named connection, and of course, as I explained, this connection cannot be shared. So that was all I had for connecting with FireDAC to any given number of databases. Of course, there are loads of databases that you can connect to, as I showed you on the list on the slides, and as well as the ones that I actually demoed. If you are working with FireDAC to connect to databases, there is this must-have book written by Dr. Kerry Jensen. It's an awesome book on FireDAC, and I know it's awesome because I was one of the technical reviewers. So go ahead and get this book. Today is better than tomorrow. You can get it from the link that I provided here or from Amazon. Apart from that, there's a one-day training course that I'm doing on FireDAC, and the next time will be in Gothenburg, Sweden on October the 11th, 2019. If you want to see what this course is about, take a look at the link that I provided here. And of course, I can do these training courses many other places in the world too. So this is going to conclude the session that I have made here, and I want to thank you all very much for listening in and watching what I've done. I hope that it will be beneficial for your further development, so I hope that your code is going to be exceptional. And now it's time for question and answers.
All right, thank you, Jens, for that session. Actually, I should talk about doing your full FireDAC training to be online as a Embarcadero Academy or something like that, make it more available for people. Excuse me. If you do have any questions for Jens, go ahead and put them in the question panel here and we'll get them answered. He's been answering as we go along as well, but now is a chance we can go over these in more detail. The differences between Pro and Enterprise and whether FireDAC is included. FireDAC is in both Pro, Enterprise, and actually also in Community Edition. The difference is that Community and Pro can access like single user local databases, whereas Enterprise and Architect can access remote databases, multi-user databases. So if you're building an application and you want to have data just for your one user, one application, that's a desktop database or a local database. You can do that in Pro and Community Edition. A remote database, multi-user database that's running on a separate server that multiple users are connecting to, that would be a Enterprise or Architect feature. Pooled connections, is that a feature in Pro as well? Do you know?
I guess it is a feature that's in Pro as long as you're doing a local connection.
Yeah, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that it should be. Like,
yeah.
Let's see. There's a question here. I'm looking for a demo or how to use FireDAC in this specific scenario. On the same form, I have a few DB edit controls for editing headers and grids and the grid for the details. After I show the form, I call FD query master insert. The question is how to, during editing after insert, insert the master ID into the detail table.
Yeah, I did try to answer that question, and it is when you have your master query and you're inserting something there, you can, as soon as you've inserted it and you have retrieved from the database the primary key value from the master table, then you can only, before insert event handler on your detail table, grab that primary key and stuff it into the foreign key. I do know that once it is in edit mode in the master, that your primary key will probably have something that you in the master won't be able to use, but there is no way for the FireDAC components, as far as I know, to actually guess what the primary key value is going to be. So you're probably going to have to do the post and then retrieve the ID from the database before you insert your child records.
Yeah, depends on the database. Some databases have features around how to do that.
Yeah.
Of course, the other thing is people are using just UIDs for that. So then you doesn't matter, right? You just generate the
exactly
unique ID and then you know it's good. In Oracle, years ago when I was doing Oracle development, we used sequences, and you could go the sequence and get what's the next going to be, and then you would know what it was going to be.
You
So
would do the same for a Firebird or an interface. You'd probably use a sequence to get, and then get the value before you actually insert the master record, and then you have the value both for the master and for the details. And that would probably be the way I would do it, getting the value before I actually insert anything.
yep, exactly. There's a question here about Cosmo DB and NoSQL DBs, whether they're supported or not.
I know that at least MongoDB is supported, and as far as I know, that's a NoSQL DB. I have never ever tried working with NoSQL DBs, but as far as I remember, I think that MongoDB is a NoSQL DB. Maybe you can confirm or unconfirm this.
That's correct. I've used MongoDB. It works great.
Yeah.
Fantastic support for that. It is currently the only NoSQL database that's supported natively by FireDAC, but if you have the enterprise connectors specifically do add Cosmos DB as well as some other ones. So you can do that with the Enterprise Connector Plus pack, adds that in there. So, and there's some great promos going on right now. If you do not have the latest version, check out the RAD offer page on embarcaderos.com, and there's a good bonus going on with the enterprise connectors. So
the enterprise connectors can be, of course, used to many other things than databases. They're really, really good. So
enterprise connectors, like, let's take what's awesome about FireDAC and connect it to everything.
yeah, it really is, and it's connecting to really, really a lot of things.
Yeah,
so I've made a connection with the enterprise connections to a Google Calendar, so I can insert and retrieve calendar posts from my Google Calendar, which would normally be in an iCal file, but instead of having to pass an iCal file, I can just read it as if it was a database with tables and fields, and it's just so much easier.
Yeah, and this was a good webinar on just connections with FireDAC, but if you're not familiar with FireDAC, check out Carrie's book, check out some of the other stuff we've done on FireDAC. I get giddy when I talk about FireDAC because it is such an amazing, powerful framework, and then when you combine that with the enterprise connectors, it is just a very exciting framework. Which databases can be connected to natively without any extra client libraries? I believe, oh gosh, I don't know. I think they all technically require the client libraries, and that's. I know there's other ones. I know what is it, Unidac, that does it without client libraries. So technically, my understanding is the database vendors say you need to use our client libraries to connect to our database. Otherwise, you're not really connecting to our database. And so you're kind of circumventing the EULA when you're not doing that. Not saying there's anything wrong with Unidac. It's a great framework. And if you need that, it's certainly an option to go at. But that's the reason why we use the client libraries, is because that's what the database vendors ask us to do.
And some of the client libraries are automatically installed on your Windows machine if you have a Windows 10 machine anyway.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah.
Although I found that the ones like Access and stuff like that, or it's actually SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server is also installed on like Windows 10. But if you update those, you unlock some additional functionality. So
yes, that is true. Yeah. And about Access, there's a question here: how to connect to an Access DB. That's actually the last demo I think was an Access database file. So you just, again, you do the same as with any other database. You just pick up the FireDAC connection, the TFD connection, and in the driver ID you just choose Microsoft Access, and that's it.
Oh, there's a question here about how to create a database programmatically for SQLite, for example.
Yes. SQLite is actually a very good example to create a database programmatically. And SQLite does support a very, very cool SQL. I will just punch in some unproved or uncompiled SQL here, because you can create table if not exists table name. So something like that. I can't remember the exact SQL sequence for here, but you can create table if not exists, and then table name, and then just provide the SQL that you want. And all you need to do with regards to the FireDAC database connecting components is that on the TFT connection, you have to provide that with a file name. The file name doesn't have to already exist. If you do run that SQL, then it will create the table, and as soon as you save it off, it's going to actually create the file for you. And I have done this with the SQLite on a mobile platform, which is a perfect place to do so.
Yeah, exactly.
And the mobile platform creating a SQLite database is even a local database, so that even works with the professional version of Delphi.
Yep, I've done the creating databases from scratch with SQLite interface both. I've done it with other ones, although you can use the FD script component to run SQL scripts, and in theory you could do that with any database. Really, it's just
yes.
I guess you could create the database file. I mean, not really what it is, right? You have the database. You have the database driver. You connect to the database driver, create the database file via script, and then create the database tables and the database within the script. So yeah, you should be able to do it with all of them using the FD.
It's just so easy with the SQLite because you just have to provide a file name where you want the database to be created, and then you just have to have the SQL create table if not exist, and then the definition of the table, of course, and then you're good to go, and it'll create automatically the file for you.
Yeah, I could go on and on about how much I love FireDAC. It took me a while to learn how to use FireDAC really well, but oh my goodness, I love it so much. It's interesting, when we first introduced FireDAC, I was talking to Kerry Jensen about writing a book about it. He's like, well, let me, get to know FireDAC a little better. And then it didn't take long. He's telling everybody, upgrade to FireDAC, get the latest version. It's so amazing. So, yeah. Let's see. So there's a question here about using FireDAC with Firebird 4, which is in beta, and also MySQL 8. So I haven't. You said you hadn't tried Firebird 4 yet, but it probably would work. I would suspect it should work.
Yes, I have a friend who actually told me the other day that he's working with Firebird 4, and I didn't exactly ask him specifically if he was doing this with Delphi, but that is his normal choice of any programming IDE that he is going to use. So I'm very strongly assuming that he is working with FireDAC on Firebird 4, but without being 100% sure.
And it's possible that there is a FireDAC driver specifically for that, but
I'm assuming they're using the FB client, like maybe in a new version. But.
Yep. So there was a question here I'm trying to find now about what is in Pro versus Enterprise, and so I went and looked it up. FireDAC client server. So the difference is client server versus not client server, and the client server databases, FireDAC Enterprise connectivity supports all databases. Okay, that's the wrong list. There it is, local embedded database connectivity. Okay, so local embedded databases include Access, SQLite, Interbase to go IB Lite, Interbase on localhost, MySQL embedded, MySQL server on localhost, Advantage database local engine, Postgres SQL on localhost, Firebird embedded, and Firebird localhost. So that is the list of what's in Pro, and then everything else is in Enterprise and Architect. So let's see, where if I see there it is. So there used to be a FireDAC add-on pack that was available that added the Enterprise, the client server functionality to the Professional Edition. But then there was also a mobile add-on pack, and so there was a number of different SKUs, and the testing involved with multiple SKUs is exponential. So the more different variations you have, the more testing is required. And so they simplified the SKUs. They took mobile add-on pack, made it part of professional, introduced community edition for free, which had all the features of professional, including mobile, and then got rid of the client server add-on pack. So it simplified the SKUs, put mobile into professional, which I thought was awesome. But then they also got rid of that. So it's kind of, 6-1, or good news, bad news thing, I guess, supposedly. But if you want the client server, you just can go to Enterprise, and like I said, there's some good deals on that right now. Okay, so what resolution was your screen running at, Anton?
That was unfortunately in 4K.
Okay.
So just to make everything as bad as possible. So I picked the highest resolution was possible and then try to cram it down your laptops or even your iPhones or Android phones. Sorry.
It's true, yeah, if you were on a mobile device. So David says, are there any issues with multiple connections to different databases at the same time?
No, there is no issue with multiple connections to different databases at all.
Yeah.
None that I've experienced, at least, and I have definitely for sure made some applications where I'm connecting to more than one database, sometimes even more than one type of database. I've made one specifically with a Microsoft SQL Server and also a MySQL. And I know everyone calls it MySQL, but it's My, because the name of the daughter of the guy who wrote MySQL, her name is My. Her little sister's name is Maria. So now I know that too. Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Good to know.
It's just one of those good nerdy things.
It's like the correct pronunciation of Linux and or Linux. Yeah, Linux. It's Linux and GIF, not GIF.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, without start a war there.
No, let's not.
And
never mind.
My DAC can get the master ID at least from SQL servers, so you probably could do it with FireDAC as well.
I'm not exactly sure if you can with MySQL getting the. I'm assuming that the comment is on before it's actually inserted the master record into the table,
Mm-hmm.
and I really don't know how it would be able to do so.
Yeah. Okay. How can I save the password using FireDAC? Is there a standard mechanism for it?
I would normally create, depending on the kind of application, I would normally create an INI file or something similar to an INI file where I would encrypt the password bit and save it there.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on. There's a lot of variables in that, because if you're like connecting to a multi-user database and
Mm-hmm.
The password is a big deal because someone could then compromise the system if they had that password.
Yeah.
That's a whole different scenario around proper security versus
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that a lot of companies actually are opposed to this, but a lot of other companies, when they have a SQL server, whether it's Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server or whatever it is, all their applications will connect to the database with the same username and password as seen from the database's point of view. And then they would have some tables inside of the database with their own invention of what a user is and what the user's password is, giving the users different rights. And I know that this actually defies what the SQL database is all about, but a lot of people do that.
Yeah, exactly. So the downside to that is that then your application is the gatekeeper to what the people can do in the database. But if they can get around your application and get straight into the database with that login, then they can do whatever they want to. And that's the downside of that.
Yes. But a lot of companies that I've worked for, they just have any application will log onto the database with the system administrator's username and password.
Thank you for Germany. Okay, Ralph's asking, there's an open mode in FireDAC, UTF-8, UTF-16, read-write, read-only. What about ANSI or ASCII?
I must admit, I really do not know.
It depends on the database, I think, because I think you, in some databases, you can specify ASCII or non-UTF-8 at least. I know that's something annoying to me when I connect to it with the wrong one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm guessing that if we read Carrie's book, I've already read it once, but I can't remember everything in there. I'm guessing it's going to be mentioned in there, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, definitely. If you're on this webinar, you should get Carrie's book. Really.
Yeah, it's a must-have.
Yeah. To make a connection secure, we are asking Windows to verify the password for us, linked to the user session to log into our software.
Yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, that's definitely a good way. So if you can log on to Windows, you can also log on to the SQL Server.
Yep, exactly. I was going to say, especially with like SQL Server, because it has supports the Windows login.
Yes.
So you could. So how is there a standard mechanism for saving the FireDAC password? You could. Oh, for my MySQL.
Yeah.
You can have it. You can put the password into the connection information, right? You can save it right there in the component.
Yes.
But that's not very secure. So it really depends on your security requirements.
Yes. If you do save it directly inside of the component, anyone with any even simple reverse engineering tool will be able to just plug that straight out of the executable.
Oh, where was the user and password for the private connection stored?
Sorry, could you say that again?
When you did the private connection, where was the user and password for that stored?
I just wrote it in the code as a parameter.
Ian says he's going to always call it MySQL, by the way, because he's a troublemaker.
Yeah, I know. He is a troublemaker. But it's not his SQL, it's someone else's. I think Oracle's.
That's true. Oracle owns it now.
Yeah.
John saying that he has a Delphi Pro with the FireDAC client server add-on pack. He says that if he goes to Pro, he won't be able to access MySQL on a server if it's not local anymore. I believe so, John. Talk to sales, because I don't know how they handle the upgrades from that. If you have client server add-on pack, they can answer that question way better than I can. So, but if you were to buy it new today, that is correct. That it is a MySQL or he's actually spelled it out, MySQL, but MySQL on a remote machine would be required.
I've started a discussion now, haven't I?
Yes.
That's good.
You're good.
It's always good to start a discussion. I must also say that I really don't know about licenses and how and why and where and whatever. I'm more technical than that, so I just have the license that I need.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the best person to talk to about licenses either, or prices. So it's definitely a salesperson for that. I've tried to and explain things before, and usually I get it wrong.
Yeah.
So I would just say, nope, talk to sales. They'll take care of you.
And they probably know more about it than we do anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
I hope.
Okay, well, I think that's it for questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Jens, for putting this session together.
You're welcome.
And let's connect and talk about maybe putting your full FireDAC session up on Embarcadero Academy.
Yes, we could do that. Yeah, we could do that. Yeah.
Great. All right. Take care and talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.